So, last section, last 5 minutes. What does this mean for Singapore? What does it mean for you? And again, I'm not standing here pretending I have an answer. I'm proposing a set of theories, and I would love us to figure out together how we push this forward. Singapore is known and admired by other governments, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, we see that you guys are kind of benchmarked, you're high up there. But for what? Efficiency. And is that going to be enough going forward? Singapore's a very efficient place, everything works, but is there something missing? Is there another half to that? One of the notions that we've been talking about is the notion, does Singapore need to be rebalanced? Is there a balancing act here? If we've worked so hard on it, lots of nodding heads, that's always a good sign. If we're working very hard over here in efficiency, what's on this side? Is it creativity? How do these two things work together? So hence, my conversation to you this morning as a designer is, I think that we're being invited into this side of the puzzle in many other places. How do we start to pull this over here? And again, this isn't some huge silver bullet over here. This idea of small, little projects that all build together, that kind of bring the balance back, I think is something that we're proposing for Singapore to counteract or to kind of work with the notion of efficiency. You're number 3 in the global competitiveness rankings, so not without a shadow of a doubt, you're doing very well. You're doing a lot of stuff right. And I think it's probably a great vantage point from which to leap further, to think broader, and to kind of lead. Everyone's looking at you guys at the moment. You're a very functional society, and I think there's something quite interesting about what you can do next. Which leads to the question that I want to sort of pose before I leave, which is, could Singapore become a design thinking country? Is this possible? Back to the beginning, how will countries be designed in the future? I think this is an opportunity here for Singapore to be a design thinking country. I already think you're well on the way to becoming it, actually. I think a lot of the stuff that we're already seeing here and the conversations that we're having and the fact that we're even invited into those conversations in the way that we are means there is something in the air here to start to bring this to life. And so by that, going back to the beginning, one which invites the citizens to participate in, contribute to, and co-create the future together. So there's lots of talk about this phrase national conversation. I don't even know what that is, but I keep hearing the phrase national conversation. There's a national conversation in the air. Could this be the national conversation? Is it about the rebalancing of Singapore, the recalibrating? And how will you know that you're being successful? So I want to give you a word of advice. 3 little letters that I think I had never heard before I came to Singapore, and I've heard more than any other since I've been here, are the following. I say with love. I think it's a bit hysterical. KPI'd to death might be the right way to describe this. Measurement matters. I am not saying for a second we all run off here into the wilderness and just make anything happen. But measuring everything to the nth degree over here at every stage suffocates. It's like removing oxygen from the creative fire. And I think it's making you risk adverse. If you take one message from this or one key thought from this, there is nothing wrong with prototyping, as you've seen from our work. There is nothing wrong with risk. There is nothing wrong with experimentation. That is the process of creation. It is a series of small bursts. And when you put it against this incredibly complicated thing over here, it removes the oxygen from the flame. So my meta message here is talk less and do more. So I want to end with a couple of thoughts. Measurement. I'm not suggesting, as I said, that KPI is useless. I do think that there is time to design a new set of metrics. And this is one of the things that we are very interested in doing with Singapore, is what is it we're going to measure in the future? How do we measure it and what matters? Efficiency is important, but it can't be the only thing to measure. So a theory is to start to measure multiple parts of this journey. You can measure the input, and you've seen from our work, you've seen from how we approach this, that there is an entire journey of doing this. You can measure input, which is how relevant is the question that you are asking. We measure this all the time. How good is the question? You can measure throughput, which is the level of participation. You can measure output, which is how valuable is your work to people? What have you learned? There is a learning layer that you can measure. And finally, you can measure outcome. And my question to Singapore is, what is it? What is the outcome you want to measure? Is it GDP? Is it happiness? Is it something else? What is it? What is the outcome that you want to measure? And finally, my last 4 slides, why will you be successful? Back to my dad. There he is. Because Singapore's an optimistic place. That's why I came here. That's why we came here in 1964. Singapore is a place that has always punched above its weight. It has always pushed forward. It has always been brave. It has always been optimistic. I think it has lost that, and I think it is time to put that back at the forefront. I think Singapore has become a little nervous, and I think it is time for Singapore to reclaim its optimism and its bravery that was founded on. So piece 1 is back to 1964, and piece 2, back to me in Parliament, is we don't now need governments that said to me in the UK, why are you here? Governments around the world need to start to ask the question, how do we start? Where do we start? How do we begin? And so again, message to citizens, message to government, work together. And an important point, I think, is also to say it's not just the government's responsibility to make this happen. It is the citizens' responsibility to step forward and do this too. So back to our Minnesota and Somalia reference, these two worlds need to start to slowly overlap. You can't just sit in the corner as a citizen and go, the government doesn't get it. You can't just sit in the corner as the government and go, citizens aren't trying. You have to figure out in the middle what is the place to begin. So last thought on design thinking. On my passport, it says profession, designer. And there's a reason for that. I don't say thinker. It says designer, and there's a reason for that. Because, and I think this is one of the things we're seeing out here in Singapore right now, design thinking is seen as a process, and it's not. It's a designed set of outcomes. Design thinking, not just thinking. So to me, if you take, again, nothing from this presentation, take away the word design, take away the word tangible, take away the word prototyping, take away the notion of scale. It's all of those things. So whether we're designing a thing, this is an energy meter we just finished designing an awesome experience, or whether we're just designing a prototype, this is from the Open IDEO Challenge looking at sanitation, this is a prototype toilet in Ghana. But it's one that we can learn from, it's real. It's not a concept, it's a real experiment. Or even whether it's a conversation. Designing new conversations is incredibly important as well. So an outcome could just be simply having the conversation versus being frustrated that the conversation is not occurring. So that's it. Enjoy designing.